Welcome to Punchline Talks Politics, a special election Hustings. This is part two. I'm Mark Owen, editor and owner of PunchlineGloucester.com. Today I'm joined in the studio with Ian Mean, director of Business West and editor of the Citizen, Echo and the Western Daily Press. Over the last half hour, we'll be quizzing the Gloucester's election candidates from the three main political parties. I'd like to welcome Richard Graham, Conservative, Rebecca Trimnell, Liberal Democrats, and Alex McIntyre from the Labour Party. We'll be splitting the hour into four different segments of 15-minute rounds. Each round will put the colour of the party out of a hat to see who will start first. Just like to thank our sponsors, Business West. Okay, let's start with part two. This is on tax. Okay, Ian, we'd like
That's right. Straight out of the bag, Richard. And the question, Richard, is what are your plans for reducing business rates? Big issue.
3 minutes.
Yeah. So the key point, Ian, is the one I mentioned at the end of the earlier question, which is the 75% reduction on SME business rates. That particularly helps high streets and the hospitality and leisure sector. And by the way, in Wales, that's been reduced to 40%. You remember that Keir Starmer said Wales was the blueprint of what life would be like under Labour. So unpromising for businesses there. But there are other aspects of tax as well. You'll know that in our manifesto, we pledged to remove the national insurance rate for the self-employed while keeping for them the benefits, for example, of access to a state pension. And that will make a real difference, as will the increase in the threshold of VAT from 85 to £95,000. That will help the smallest entrepreneurs. And it's also worth highlighting things like the fuel duty, which we've reduced by 5p. That all helps businesses who've got to be mobile and move things around. So there's quite a lot that we're doing, but there's also one aspect which isn't quite tax, but I think, Ian, both you and Mark and all the SMEs will be able to relate to this, which is prompt payment. And over the last 14 years, we've been able to bring down the average rate of payment, particularly from big businesses and big organisations like the County Council, from an average of 80 days to a current 30 days. There's more that can be done, and there's a prompt payment review happening at the moment, but it is a great start to something that is crucial to cash flow for small businesses.
Can I just ask, would you be in a position to scrap business rates entirely?
Well, I think we've got to be very careful about scrapping business rates entirely. It generates £29 billion, so that's potentially a huge hole in the public finances. And what are you going to replace it with? These things need an awful lot of thought and care. So I suspect it's no easy task to completely replace it. But what I do think is helpful is to do what we've done and be very flexible about how you apply it, particularly for small businesses and entrepreneurs.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Same question.
Okay,
so
thank
to you,
Rebecca.
What are your plans for reducing business rates?
Well, like I said in your first section of this show, the Lib Dems are actually the only party to change business rates, in the sense that we would actually abolish them and we would instead introduce a commercial landowner levy. And this would be about taxing the actual landowner of the value of the land. And this wouldn't be actually on the business itself, which takes away the burdens, the administrative burdens and the liability of business rates away from that small business. The other benefit of this is also that it would stop a lot of empty properties, because they would be forever. They would have to pay, as I say, this commercial landowner levy. So they would be keen to get businesses into these properties. So I think, you know, this is a very radical change, and I think it's one that's very much needed and wanted from businesses. As we know, businesses have so much tax they have to pay on all sorts of different things. And this would be one which would be, I think, such a benefit to businesses. But I think it's also about making the tax system fairer and raising money needed for investment. And so I think it's really important to say that we would like to reverse the Conservative tax cuts for the big banks and restore the bank surcharge and bank levy revenues to what they were in 2016. And we would also like to increase the digital services tax on social media firms and other tech giants from 2% to 6% as well. And also with capital gains tax, we would like to close the loopholes exploited by the super wealthy too. Thank you.
Okay, Rebecca. Alex, the same question.
Thank you very much. I'm interested to hear about Richard's tax plans because, as usual, the Conservatives have made lots of spending and tax commitments with absolutely no plan on how to pay for it. And we saw how that played out under Liz Truss. On business rates, Labour have been very clear. And Rebecca, I'm afraid to say the Liberal Democrats aren't the only party that have pledged to scrap business rates, because Labour have pledged to scrap it too and replace it with a much fairer system that will level the playing field between the high street and the online giants, because it's really important that we are supporting our small and medium-sized enterprises on the high street rather than just giving tax breaks to those companies that are making the most. But what's really important, and what Labour have put at the heart of its manifesto, is economic stability, because actually what businesses really need is some certainty in our economy so that they can make plans for the future and invest. And so what Labour have promised on business tax in particular is a pathway, an understanding from government to business that they will know exactly what the tax rates will be over the period of the remainder of the Labour government, which will be set out later this year, I understand. And that will give businesses certainty in the taxes they're going to pay. They won't be going up and down on corporation tax. In fact, we've said we won't be increasing corporation tax for the length of this Parliament, and we may actually decrease it if we need to match other competitive economies. That economic stability goes much further than just on business rates and business tax. And it's really important to all of our businesses that they know we won't play fast and loose with the country's finances like the Conservatives did under Liz Truss, which made everyone was paying more on their mortgages and led to so much economic instability and uncertainty. And I want Gloucester to be the best place in the country to run a business. And that kind of stability is what businesses need to be able to make those decisions, to invest in our city. And that's what Labour will deliver if they're in government. And I'm the MP for Gloucester from Thursday.
Okay, thank you. I mean, just another question then. Businesses are telling us, we've got 1 minute each. Again, we're going to try and keep it a little bit tight. Businesses are telling Punchline, that they are worried more and more about the rises to the minimum wage. What is your view on this?
Richard.
Well, the minimum wage has gone up, as you know. It went up significantly this year, and it's risen significantly during the period of a Conservative government. But of course, there have been balancing factors for businesses and employers, particularly the reduction in national insurance, which helps employers reduce their own tax bill, and the employment allowance has gone up. It's now at £5,000. So there are swings and roundabouts on this. And the important thing, I think, is to be able to help both the workers make sure that they've got a decent wage to cope with rising inflation, particularly in the last year. And Mark, I must just come back briefly on this point of business stability. Of course, all businesses want stability. And equally, none of us can completely control things like pandemics and the invasion of Ukraine. But what they expect of government is to be able to restore things as quickly as possible. So that's why I'm proud of the fact that under Prime Minister Rishi, inflation has gone from 11% to 2%. Growth is now the fastest in the G7. You can see that the energy bills have gone down £500 earlier this year and another £100 just today, 7% cut in energy bills, which is really important for business. And the last thing we need at this time, to be honest, is a whole raft of potentially very trades union-friendly employment laws coming in from a new Labour government, short of people who've got any small business experience. I've been a director of my father's small firm for decades now, and I can tell you that owning a pub or owning the lease on a pub, which is what we have, is not an easy business at all. So it's very easy for lawyers, whether they're leaders of parties or candidates for a constituency in which they don't live, to promise all sorts of things. But the reality is, do they have the experience of knowing how tough it is to run a small business? And that is important.
Okay, thanks so much, Richard. We're going to give... Sorry, it's Alex next. No, sorry. Rebecca, same story. Minimum wage, please, Rebecca.
I think the minimum wage can be difficult for small businesses that are struggling, but I do think it is a case of balancing different things. And for an actual individual, then, you know, to protect that minimum wage is just crucial for people. And in fact, the Liberal Democrats, we actually want to set a 20% higher minimum wage for people on 0-hour contracts at times of normal demand, to compensate them for the uncertainty of their fluctuating hours of work. And I think this is just fair, but also giving a right to request a fixed hours contract after 12 months for 0 hours. Not only that, but we'd also like to see a £2 increase per hour on the minimum wage for care workers. This is a valuable sector, and it just values that work, the amazing work that our carers do. And I think it's only right and fair that they are to have that increase of £2 per hour to the national minimum wage for this particular industry. And then you have apprenticeships. We need to boost the take-up of apprenticeships, including by guaranteeing that they are paid at least the national minimum wage, by scrapping the lower apprentice rate. And that's something that I'm very proud of with the Liberal Democrats, because it's recognising their worth as apprentices, and that, of course, all fairness given to them, they should be paid the national minimum wage.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Rebecca.
Alex?
Thank you very much. Look, we know that there are so many rising costs on small businesses, and we know we need to do more to support them. On the national minimum wage, it is really important that we support people earning that as well and make work pay. So we've made sure that when we're considering the levels of national minimum wage, we need to be setting that in line with the cost of living. Currently, it's not linked to the cost of living, and so many families are struggling as a result. And I'd like to come back on Richard's comments, because yes, the economy might be growing ever so slightly now, but we've just come out of a recession. And the question you need to ask your constituents is, do you feel better off now after 14 years of Conservative government than you did in 2010? In 2010, we had very few people using food banks. Now there are millions of emergency food parcels handed out every year. And on small businesses, I may be a lawyer, Richard, but I've worked in partnership with businesses up and down the country. My parents ran a small business. I've worked in small businesses. I've worked in hospitality for 11 years. I'm very happy to be in a party that is going to champion business and support business. No four-letter word approaches to businesses like the former Prime Minister. We are going to be supporting them and working in partnership with them. And I will work so hard to make sure that Gloucester is the best place to start and run a business in our country, because I've worked in partnership with businesses my entire career, and I will continue to do so if I'm elected on Thursday.
Okay, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for this particular part of the segment. I'd just like to thank you all for watching. If you like the show, please like, share, and subscribe, and return again for part 3, which will be back very shortly. Thank you.